field, you're up against something. There's a fence, there's a wall, there's a septic tank, there's whatever. And that's why this is really relevant. Even if you have your own clinical practice or a mobile practice, you're gonna see these kinds of things. And the next reason is because there's nothing more frustrating. It is so frustrating to have 500 kilos or 1,000 pounds, 1,500 pounds of animal that's laying on the ground. It's terrified, it's frustrating. Barda has already discussed a lot of the things that are going on in this horse while it's down medically, etc. You know it's frustrating. You know that that animal doesn't need to be down for very long because its medical condition is going downhill. It's so frustrating. And then, of course, there's a couple other reasons that it's relevant. And that is when the horse is in these kinds of situations, it's, first of all, it's really common that they're going to call you. You're going to usually have, how do I say this nicely? Some very emotional person who is going to ask you to go into what we consider a confined space with obstacles with this animal that could kill you. It's a ticking time bomb. Jim Green from BARDA used that reference many, many years ago about that you're basically going into the hot zone of a time bomb. And that's exactly what you're looking at here. So this person's willing to send you in there by yourself, even though they're not willing to go in there by themselves. So that's why we want to try to be as safe as possible. And we're going to talk about a lot of that today. I'll go into detail on this situation in the second lecture, but this is just one example of people say, well, I'm used to dealing with horses in lateral recumbency. And I say, yeah, maybe in a clinical situation, you do that a few times a week, maybe a couple times a month. For some people, they only deal with it a couple times a year. In surgical situations, you may see it more often. But really, what I'm talking about is lateral recumbency with obstacles. And then the other thing is that when we talk about lateral recumbency, we also have to think about external recumbency. What's the medical status? Now, Dr. Nickel went into a lot of detail on the medical status, and I'm just going to keep moving because that's not my bailiwick as far as treatments and drugs and those kind of things. But what I want you to pay attention to is exactly as she pointed out. This is sort of a good example of the time course. This horse was being ridden. It, for whatever reason, went off the trail. It ended up into a muddy situation about 2:30 in the afternoon. Next thing you know, they fiddle fart around with it. Am I allowed to say that? Fiddle fart? They messed around with it in the mud for an hour. They finally call welfare for some help, hoping that they would have some equipment. And of course, it takes time for animal welfare and the fire department and everybody else to get there to help. They get there at 4:30. By now, your patient's been in the mud for 2 hours. What's going on? He's stressed. He's getting dehydrated. As soon, you know, that whole thing of body water, where the stress hormones drive that to dehydration. So what's happening, as she pointed out earlier, with the kidneys? What's happening with his lungs? He's under compression, depending on how much he's struggling. How stressed is he? Is he a calm horse, or is he sort of a thoroughbred type that's going to be a little exhausted? So in this situation, they actually got the equipment they needed by 6:30 in the evening. They had been messing around with this since 2:30. So now it's 4 hours in. And by the time they got there, they got everything on, and they were able to move the horse to safety at 7:30. That's 5 hours in a situation that causes, you know, all kinds of things are going on. The dehydration, the hypothermia, and hypothermia, it doesn't have to be cold and wet in England for you to have hypothermia. You can get it in many situations where the animal is exhausted and stressed. And at this point, once they finally get him out, it's dark, of course, and miserable for everybody else as well, as she was pointing out. So in this case, they used something called a sideways drag or a sideways slide, and they managed to get him out. But again, it's the time course. It's how long it takes you. And so often, as veterinarians or veterinary technicians or nurses, we end up getting there an hour or 2 hours after the call because we're a long way away from where the scenario is. It's actually amazing to me how many times I end up getting phone calls or PMs across Facebook from people asking me how to solve some of these situations. And honestly, if I can talk to a firefighter or a veterinarian, usually I can give them a couple of field expedient ideas that they can use. And that's what we're going to do today, is talk about some of those field expedients. So just don't forget that it's medical status of your patient as well. So when we talk about recumbency in large animal rescue, we're talking about recumbency in all kinds of situations. Down in stalls, down in trailers. Obviously, these are American horse trailers, but your trailers maybe look a little bit different, but it's the same kinds of things. There's lots of obstacles in there. What is your ways of getting to the horse? If the horse struggles in there, a fire department looks at this as being a confined space with obstacles, and it's actually what we call an IDLH environment. It's immediately dangerous to life and health. A 1,000-pound horse falls against you in that trailer, and it can actually crush you and before somebody can get you out. So those are the kinds of places that we are very careful about sending any human being with the chance of having that animal crush us. And some other examples that you may or may not have seen in your time so far working with horses. Several people have pointed out in previous lectures that horses are very sensitive and can sort of lose their minds and panic. Well, there you go. This one tried to jump out the window of his stall. The other one was, they were actually working on him in the stocks for a veterinarian facility, and he jumped the stocks. So how are you going to handle these kinds of situations? You're going to get to this situation, and the fire department, what they're going to do is they're going to look at you and say, hey, you're the veterinarian, what do we do? So we're just going to give you some ideas on how you may be able to handle these with some simple equipment and with a little bit of help. Never be afraid to call for fire rescue in any country. Sometimes they may say, we don't do animals. And so what I tell them is, there's a life safety hazard here. I need some help. I need some lighting. I need traffic control, all those kinds of things. You don't have to help me with the horse, ostensibly. They'll probably end up helping you anyway, but just come give me some life safety and protect me while I'm trying to deal with this situation with the horse. Here's some other examples of very common things that happen with horses in transports that panic and jump over the butt bars, the chest bars, the rear of the trailer ramps, those kinds of things. There's actually hundreds of those pictures that you can find on Google Images, all examples of animals that do just what animals do. And if we don't prevent that from happening, some of this comes down to poor design and manufacturing horse trailers, but some of it also comes down to pretty amazing abilities by these animals to move themselves. So I like to put those kinds of pictures in people's minds so they can understand what I'm talking about, that recumbency is not what you think it is flat on the ground. And even dorsal recumbency that we do in the veterinary industry for surgery and those kinds of things looks very different in these kinds of situations. An animal puts his foot through a fence, ends up upside down in a ditch. All of you know when you're doing your anesthesia in a horse for surgery that it's without having anesthesia in a horse upside down is very, very difficult to do. But I defy you to do some of these responses for dorsal recumbency without some kind of general anesthesia. And of course, you're going to have a good team and be very efficient with your rescue, because that horse can't stand that upside down without having all the equipment that's nice to have in a clinic out there in the field. Posterior recumbency, where the animal's got its butt down into a septic tank, down into a hole. Sometimes these happen in urban areas. Sometimes they happen in very rural areas. The one on the top right is actually a horse that got into the hayloft, or almost got into the hayloft, and had to be rescued from that. So absolutely amazing situations. In the next lecture, we'll go into some of the case studies and demonstrate how people actually got some of these animals out of these things. But I just want to have a picture in your mind of what we're really talking about with recumbency. And a lot of this goes back to Mother Nature is telling that animal, get up and leave. And as Dr. Nicola pointed out, it tries to leave because its instinct says I've got to leave, but it can't leave. And so then it starts to struggle. And so sometimes I tell people the best thing you can do when you first get there, your plan should be get everybody back, so that the animal, you're not inside their personal space, you're not inside their their ability to run away, and they'll stop struggling while you come up with your plan. Why is it that everybody has to be up close, petting on the horsey, doing whatever they're doing, and the horse is struggling and throwing his head? Step back 30 feet, and you'd be amazed how much they'll calm down, which makes their medical status much better. So here's where we get to talk about some PPE. So you'll notice the first veterinarian has on a helmet. There's a helmet. And if you don't like that one, I got another one. This one's got cool stuff on it, okay? Large Animal Rescue Commander, okay? And you can put your stickers on it. You can put a GoPro on it. It looks really cool. Please get a helmet. Reflective PPE. Anytime you're working next to the road or you're working in a situation that's dark, you really ought to have that PPE on for two reasons. First of all, so other people can see you, especially next to roads and vehicles. But second of all, they know who you are. You're going to notice in many of these situations, you can't tell who's the vet. So it's hard to be in charge of what you're doing if nobody knows who you are. Proper body position, and then of course, for identification. Let's take a look at the other vet. No helmet, no PPE. She's in the wrong place, back there by the hip. She's wearing her I don't know what kind of shoes those are, but they look like tennis shoes. It's totally inappropriate for what she's doing with a large animal rescue, with a 1,000-pound animal that has steel shoes on its feet and can kick your ever-loving head off. So why are we doing this? Why do we do this in our industry? Why do we do this with neurologic horses? Why do we do this with cast horses? We do it all the time, right? Because nobody ever taught us to wear PPE. PPE is important. So let's take a look at a different situation with people that are in the correct PPE. These folks are not. The veterinarian does have on her gloves, but otherwise no PPE. She's standing between the animal's head and the feet on a cast horse in a stall. It looks to me to be a very large animal. And if that horse goes to struggle or tries to get up, she is in the absolutely wrong position. And you wonder why veterinarians and veterinary technicians get injuries. This is why. We're standing in the wrong place. No helmet, no gloves, probably incorrect shoes, and standing in the kill zone. I know that Dr. Nicola talked about the kick zone, but I call it the kill zone. There are people who have died being in that position. And some of them are in the veterinary industry, and some of them are vet technicians, and some of them are owners. But you notice that the folks from Cherokee County Fire Rescue who have a large animal rescue team, they've got on kick vests, they've got on helmets, they've got the appropriate shoes, and they're staying on the dorsal side of the horse. Why is it that we get so complacent that we stand in the wrong places? So there they are, out of the kill zone, proper positioning, and looking like a professional. That's really what PPEs are about. It's for safety, but it's also to make sure you look like you know what you're doing. You're going to notice that when everybody else on the scene, the fire rescue, law enforcement, everybody else shows up, if you've got on a helmet and you've got on your gear and identification as a veterinarian or a veterinary technician, you look a lot more professional and people actually know who you are. This is a vet in the green, and the young lady that's managing the head as the animal handler is a veterinary technician. They're working with their New South Wales fire rescue folks that do a lot of large animal rescue. This is a horse in a ditch being glided out to a safer spot. But they've worked together in the past, and you can tell because the incident commander is standing off the scene, the animal handler is doing her job. It just looks different when you're doing it professionally and you've worked together as far as your safety protocols and how you're going to do some of these kinds of things. In other words, PPE really has a purpose. This is the same guy, same horse, 2 years difference. He showed up and he was took my class the first time, and he was in a cowboy hat. And 2 years later, he came as an assistant instructor, and that time he was decked out correctly. Instead of cowboy boots and a cowboy hat, you know, Americans were famous for our cowboy hats. He had on an appropriate helmet. He's got on his PPE. I would like to see him have on gloves, but it does look a little sexy. Professional increases your safety no matter who you are. Kick vests, to me, are a good investment. Many fire departments are really into doing the risk assessment, and they've decided that if they're going to be sending an operational team down to do something with an animal, they should have on a kick vest as well as a helmet. It needs to be a helmet with a chin strap, by the way, because those little crappy ones that you wear, if a construction helmet, it'll fall off your head in a skinny minute. You need a good quality helmet with a chin strap. You'll notice that the two veterinarians and the veterinary technician dealing with the horse in the arena had some kind of issue, broken back or something. It's a bucking horse. They are also wearing helmets. A very appropriate situation considering the situation. Probably not a horse that gets handled a lot otherwise. So I'd like to see you guys purchase a helmet, one for you and one for your vet tech or your nurse, because you notice the veterinarian down there on the far left looks pretty naked on his head. He's in the wrong place, and he doesn't have control of the horse's head, and he doesn't have control of those front legs. He could flail at any minute and really hurt this guy. So put something on your head to protect yourself. It looks just so much better, and you're so much safer. I've been tagged in my head on my helmet by the back end of a horse when it was laying down in lateral recumbency, when I was helping a veterinarian do something. And when it tagged my helmet with its foot, I was very thankful for the fact that I had that helmet on. Back then, it was just a simple equestrian helmet. These days, I wear a rescue helmet, rescue quality ASTM rated helmet. Okay, so we've already done a lot of discussion. I'm not a veterinarian, so I'm not going to talk about the specific chemistry that you're going to use to bring in sedation or anesthesia in your horses, but you guys have to handle these kinds of clinical situations with animals that are down all the time. I will remind you that there are some really good head protection that is available these days. There's a yellow one, there's a black one, there's the brand new Dr. Becker's version of head protection that is made for clinical situations with a handle on each side, so you can actually pick that head up and move it in a little bit more ergonomically correct position. But restraining a recumbent horse is something that we have to do all the time as veterinarians and veterinary technicians. And it really adds up over the years to injuries if you're not really careful. So we're trying to prevent those kind of things. This is a good example of the traditional way that we have sat on the horse's head in the past. I'm 6'2" and a little bit north of 200 pounds myself. And many, many times over the years, I have done this. I have sat on that head or put my knee on the neck and put my full weight. And I have been thrown forward, I've been thrown backwards, I've thrown sideways by a horse that was really struggling. And I bet all of you have some stories of when you have been thrown around on the ground by a horse struggling to try to get up. Unfortunately, people get injured that way too, and it's ergonomically a very bad place for you to be. But we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a second. There's some improvements on how we do that these days. Here's other examples of people sitting on the animal's head. How are you going to get up if something really goes wrong? You are in the wrong position. You are down there, up close and personal with the head and neck. That animal weighs 10 times more than you do. How are you going to move? And as you get older, some of you young people, you may not understand this, but as you get older, you just don't move as fast. So it becomes more and more dangerous as you get older. So we've come up with a better way. What's interesting is I would have firefighters that would come to some of my training events, and they would do this. They would put their foot directly behind the horse's ears in the atlanto-occipital area, and they would stand up, and I would say, no, no, you're supposed to get down on your knees. And they would look at me like, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, but okay. And I said, but I've been trained by veterinarians my whole career. And then one day I thought, what am I doing? This is dumb. Why did I get trained by veterinarians that way? Because a lot of guys that were veterinarians in the past trained me to do what they could do because they were bigger and they were stronger. And most of the time, they could hold the horse down. But who is really in the equine industry today? It's mostly females, and we don't weigh as much, and we're not as strong. Even me, I may be a big girl, but I'm not as strong as a man my size. So guess what? I need to be able to use my weight with leverage to maintain control. By putting my foot in that neck and leveraging the horse's nose up slightly, so you twist that neck, you can keep that horse down a lot more efficiently. People say, well, I still need to be able to look at his capillary refill time. I still need to be able to get his facial nerve, his facial artery. Yes, you can lean down and do those kinds of things, but 90% of the time, your head is not in the kill zone. That's why we try to prefer these kinds of ways of doing this. And I'll be presenting a paper to AAAP on that in December as well. So I know I'm not supposed to say do not in my slides, but I'm going to do it. So I'm going to say, please do not jump in without a plan. Dr. Nicola talked a lot about trying to get a hold of the people that are on the scene, trying to keep them out of the area where you're performing the rescue. Send this guy to make tea, make coffee, go get a tractor, go get a blankie, go get a halter, go get a rope, anything to keep those volunteers busy. Or tell them, hey, can you stand over there and keep everybody off the scene? And they will protect your scene. It just slows the rescue effort. And if this guy falls down in this hole with the horse, it's no longer about the horse rescue. It's about the human rescue at that point. And then you got all kinds of challenges, because now you may have to actually do something bad to the horse to try to save the human. So I hope that makes sense to you guys. Put yourself in a bad position like this. Ergonomic injuries and kinetic injuries occur. The ergonomic injuries, usually, you know, I'm over 50, and a lot of those ergonomic injuries I didn't see till the last 10 years. But all you young people, please don't lift things the wrong way. Don't do those repetitive motion injuries, all those kind of things. This guy in the picture is actually, his back is against part of the roof of this overturned trailer. He's trying to hold up the whole horse's head and neck with his chin right up next to that horse's head. If that horse moves at all, he's going to crush that guy's back. He's going to scrub him along the edges of that cut metal. It's going to be awful. This is not a position for that person to be. So try to prevent those kind of kinetic injuries. I love the fact that you've got a blindfold on. I hope that the animal's sedated as efficiently as possible, but do not put someone in this position. It's a very bad position for anyone. Plus, they're in a confined space. Here's another example of people being in the wrong places. Kinetic injuries, as Dr. Nicola was talking about, when they're frozen in panic, all of a sudden they start to move under the effect of the hormones that are in their body. And when that happens, you might see it coming, but you don't have time to move, and you're gonna get kicked in the face, you're gonna get kicked in the knees. So don't let people be in these kinds of positions directly in front of the horse or between its front legs and its neck. Bad places to be. Other things I don't want you to do. Don't use the head and neck as an anchor. I've got so many pictures of people with just a rope around the animal's neck, piece of webbing around the neck. It's for guidance only. You should have control of that head. You should have a halter on, but you do not need to put anything around that neck. I'm not sure exactly what they were doing here, especially since that is actually connected to a tractor. That is not the way to pull a horse out of a situation. This is a cow, but it illustrates that technically you can pick it up by its head and neck, but it's probably not a really good thing to do. This cow actually, for whatever reason, walked away and was fine. I would like to know what he was doing 2 days later. I don't know how much damage it would have done to this animal, but I know that there's many anecdotal, and I have pictures and videos of animals that were not okay when they were set down. They had neurologic problems or long-term damage to parts of their throat, etc. Let's not do that. It's not intended as an anchor. You wouldn't do it to you. You wouldn't do it to a human, so don't do it to an animal. Some of you have probably seen this before. I got this from an incident in New Zealand many years ago. The animal was in the mud. They attached a chain and a rope to the tail, and they actually were able to pull her tail off. Use manual systems. Dr. Nicola said, use manual systems. Do not use the mechanical systems unless you absolutely have to. If you absolutely have to use a mechanical system, you need to mitigate it in many different ways. Increasing surface area, making sure that you've got control measures, people that are directing the mechanical equipment. I'll show you some examples in the next lecture, but this is unconscionable. And this one's unconscionable too. Sadly, this is one of those situations where people were not communicating as effectively as they should. They hadn't been working together. This veterinarian was called to the scene to work with the fire rescue team. They came up with a plan which involved the horse was upside down in dorsal recumbency in a ditch. and they came up with a plan of lifting it by a thick strap around its neck. But as you can see, it was held up way too long, and pronating it over onto its feet might have worked, but picking it up and taking it up was not a good example. And this animal died a couple days later of neurologic and respiratory trauma, and I'm not surprised. It's the exact same thing that would happen to me if you picked up my entire weight by my throat. Okay, this is one of the other things that I see in many, many situations. I don't know what it is about human beings, but we feel like we have to snatch or pull on the head, support the head while we're doing anything with a horse. First of all, we get up close, we try to hold close to where the halter is, get further away. The animal handler should have 6 or 8 or 10 feet of lead rope to be able to get further away from the animal. And do not pull on the horse's head. You shouldn't be pulling on the horse's head for any reason as part of the rescue. You should have something around the animal, webbing, etc., around the animal's body to be able to pull their body forward or manipulate it in some manner. You don't need to be pulling on the head. Supporting the head is different, but not pulling on the head. Whenever you pull on the head of any animal, including you, if I snatch on your chin strap, you will snatch your head back. If I pull on your head and you're a horse, you're going to snatch your head back. This person is not doing any good for the rescue effort, and the horse is just struggling to try to get up. Dr. already talked about this, working from the dorsal side and staying out of the kill zone. The headbutt zone is the person that is doing the animal handling, and sometimes that can be very challenging. And please be very careful if you're the animal handler and you're in the headbutt zone, because all they have to do is move their head and neck a little bit, and they'll get you. I think this is probably the best picture ever of staying out of the kill zone. Let me tell you a little bit about what happened here. This is a horse that was trapped in the mud. They got all the horse out except one leg. One leg is down in the mud. It's trapped around tree roots. And this guy is trying desperately to get that horse's foot out by going into the mud with his arm with a knife and trying to cut those tree roots from around the horse's foot. And I saw the pictures, and I know some of the folks that were doing the rescue, and I said, oh, that's awful. And they said, well, we'd sedated the horse heavily, and the horse was really tired, and he wasn't going to kick. And I said, yeah, I still would have liked to have seen you put something around that other foot and tied it off to a person or a tree or something, just to minimize that. And then, of course, the guy needs to have on a helmet, because if something does impact that head, you want a little bit of protection. I'm not saying that a helmet would save you 100% from a kick in this position, but it sure would be a little bit better. Stay out of kill zone. So Dr. Nicola said that she's going to send some equipment. I've got some equipment lists too that I'll send to Grazia and let her share with you guys through Junior Vet. But this is really all you need for most of the kinds of things that we're doing. You need some webbing. That's to increase the surface area. I like to have it 7 to 10 meters long, because then you can do all kinds of things with it. If you're rescuing a pony or a llama or something smaller, you'll find that 7 to 10 meters is too long and it gets in your way. But generally for most horses and draft horses, you need that length. You need some gloves. We already talked about helmets. Put on a helmet. Reciprocating saw with a battery pack. That's sometimes available in people's barns or houses. I like to have one available immediately. As a veterinarian, you might want to consider having one of those. It certainly will save you a lot of angst. Cane or a boat hook, those are reach tools. You're going to see some of those in the pictures of the case reports. Some really nice quality rope. I like Kern Mantle rescue rope or yacht braid rope, maybe about 10 meters of it, so that you can do various things. You're not going to attach it to the horse. You're not going to attach it to around its body. You're going to use the webbing for that. But you may have to attach the webbing to something else, tie it off to a tree or whatever. So it's always nice to have some webbing and some rope. A vest or a jacket with some kind of reflective for your ID, and it's bright, especially if you're on the side of the road. Many of us end up doing these attendances to on-road rescues, and you want to be able to be in a safe position and people know where you are. Hand tools, duct tape, and hay twine, of course, those are really nice to have for whatever we have to do. And then a local resources list. Dr. Nicola touched on that a little bit. You need to know how you're going to get a hold of somebody at 2 o'clock in the morning when you need fencing or you need a horse trailer, or you need some other, who knows, some kind of resource. You need to know where those folks are, and you need to have that immediately available to you. It's really nice if you can work with your local resources ahead of time to get those lists together of contact information, etc. So webbing, reach tools, these are just a couple examples. This is a cane that's been extended on a pole that's actually you can extend it or shorten it to be able to move those legs around instead of reaching in and putting your head down there next to your hand to hold a leg or a hoof. In the kill zone, we don't want your head down there. We don't want your arm down there either. And then manipulating webbing. This is obviously a training situation. However, this is the kind of thing that we're going to do in a real situation. And here we go. So some of the simple ways to address the situations where you're trying to move a horse and manipulate the entire animal's body. One example is something called the simple configuration of the forward assist. Literally one piece of webbing around the horse at the withers and down between his, quote, elbows. I know you veterinarians know the fancy names for all those bones, but it's still elbows to most people. To slightly encourage the horse to go forward. That may help the horse to rise. It may help the horse to come forward out of mud or a deep situation. The problem with the simple configuration is that it may slip off. So you may end up putting in a lark's foot or a cinch configuration where you put one loop through the other to make sure that you don't have it slide off of the, quote, elbows. This is an example from the UK of a horse that was trapped in a horse trailer. I think this was one of Jim's rescues, Jim Green. And simple configuration, they took out part of the trailer and they're just sliding the horse out with the forward assist. You'll notice those white rescue glides, they're allowing the horse to just easily slide out instead of going whomp across the edge. Also provides some edge protection as you're bringing the animal out. Another simple configuration of the forward assist. This is not fancy webbing. It's probably not as thick as I like. I like about 4 inches of webbing. This is probably 2 inch. However, all they were doing here was trying to rotate the horse away from the situation he'd been in and remove the fence so that they can encourage the horse to stand up. Very simple way to move a horse. When you start talking about sideways slides or drags, you're going to need 2 of those kinds of straps. In this case, this is one of my friends from Australia. She attended a rescue in some mud, and they actually had to move the horse about 30 meters to get him to a place where the mud was not going to absorb the horse back in. How does this happen? Someone is galloping across the mud, and everything's great until it's not great. And literally, his horse just slid into the mud. What's interesting is a lot of people say, oh my goodness, the horse is going to go all the way into the mud. I can tell you if people have been digging. They haven't been digging. They know better. They just were trying to get the pieces of straps around. If you dig in this kind of mud, you will effectively bury the horse. The horse has such a big, long field, it essentially floats even on very thick mud, unless it struggles really hard or you start digging. So don't dig. And I'll show you some pictures of that in the next presentation as well. They did manage to get this horse out effectively, which is good because that is actually an ocean that's going to come back in a few more hours. The ocean will probably fill that to about 6 feet. Other examples of sideways drags out of situations. This could be a pool. In this case, it happens to be a ditch. This is in South Florida, and the ditches are all made out of coquina rock, which is extremely sharp. So they're using the rescue glide in this situation for edge protection as they slide the horse out. You notice it takes a lot of people. And this is why sometimes people end up using mechanical equipment, even though we don't like it. They just can't get enough help. So call for help, get extra help. This horse has been sedated. He also has a blindfold on his face. You've got an animal handler that's managing the head separately from the rest of the animal. And I greatly appreciate them doing a really nice job and getting some good pictures of this, procedure. This is an example from Nevada. Willis Lamb has a situation with feral and wild horses out there. They do 300 or 400 rescues a year, and most of them are feral and wild horses. And the horses end up in all kinds of situations like this because they live in a suburban environment. And they aren't really afraid of people. They come into suburban areas to get food and eat your lawn, those kinds of things. So this one ended up in a cattle guard. And so obviously they have veterinarians that are part of their team. They all know the protocols. They know how they're going to work this together. They got a great picture of this horse, anesthetized, obviously, because he's wild. They manipulated his body out of the guard onto a rescue glide using the sideways drag technique. And then they slid the glide off of the grate to a safe area, released the animal with minimal injuries. That's probably a really tough rescue to do if you're not used to handling those kinds of animals. And if you have those kinds of animals, I know Romania even has wild horses. Dr. Ovidio Russo, I got a chance to work with him, and he was explaining some of the situations that those horses end up in. And you really need to have a good team to be able to respond to those situations. Okay, so what is a good example of the kind of situation you might see more commonly? Here's one from the UK with a horse that's got one leg through the floor of the transport. This has nothing to do with large animal rescue, but I am on a mission to try to improve trailer transport for horses. Most of the trailers that are out there that you are purchasing and spending a lot of money on have a plywood floor with a little crappy membrane of plastic across it. And you guys are gonna see one of these in your working life. They're awful. Many times the horse has such severe injuries, it has to be euthanized on the spot. But it is unconscionable that the industry is selling us trailers of this poor manufacture. We see it in every country, but particularly the lightweight European type trailers. Anyway, get back to the large animal rescue part. The veterinarian is identified. She's got a helmet on. She's standing in a safe place in the door of that trailer so that she can get out of the way. I would prefer that she not have her chin right above the horse in case his head comes up and slams her in the chin. But otherwise, she's trying to approach from a safe position. It looks like the horse is sedated at this point. In this case, I think they took the roof off the trailer, which is not difficult to do in these crappy trailers. Just remove the roof, and they actually did a vertical lift up out of the trailer, which is easy with some of the teams in the UK. They've got telehandlers and other equipment that's easy to get a hold of. Their teams have worked through this. Vertical lift is really difficult to do, and it really requires a lot of coordination if you've never done it before and the right equipment. It's one of those things I try to tell people, don't do it unless you really know what you're doing and you've practiced ahead of time. It's not something you want to wing it on a weekend. This is an example from the Czech Republic. Tomáš Forchák, he has been working very hard in Brno with some of their slings and tripods. They do a lot of responses there. It's a lot closer to you guys. You might want to reach out to him. This is just one example of lifting a cast draft horse. As Dr. Nicola was saying, some of those really big horses, the longer they're down, we're under the gun to try to get them up and get them moving. They were able to set up, get a sling on him and set up the A-frame in his stall and lift him and then get him transported to definitive veterinary treatment, which is of course what we always want to do if we possibly can. But really good example, and I love it when people get nice pictures to be able to share with others for educational purposes. How do you safely lift a recumbent patient in a clinical situation? There are some slings that are out there. There's the large animal lift sling that UC Davis, it's sold through CDA products. There's the Becker lift sling in the United States. The French have a sling. The Czech Republic has a type of sling. There's numerous slings that are out there. I will tell you that generally something that is made of webbing and collects the horse on their skeletal elements, such as these types of slings, we find those to be much better than small ropes or anything like that with small surface area. We liked it to have a chest strap and a butt strap, simply because animals can teeter-totter in these, especially if they panic. So these days, those slings come with all those accoutrements, and really, they're immediately available. It amazes me that there's not more veterinarians that use them. It does require 24-hour care once the animal is being supported in the sling, but most of these slings are not for 24-hour care. The Anderson sling, yes, it's for 24-hour care, but these slings are made to be able to get the horse up, support his weight. And we've even had horses that were neurologic that were supported in these kinds of slings, and they learn to sleep in the sling. They can just sort of relax into the sling, and it assists them with support. It's not made to take their entire weight off the ground. Some of the other things that are out there as far as moving some of these recumbent animals, which is often frustrating, they're in a really bad situation. They're out in the rain, in the field, in the mud, and we want to move them to definitive treatment at a veterinary clinic, or at least to a warm, dry stall or a warm, dry arena. Sometimes it's a trail or field accident after you've been working the horse or racing the horse or riding the horse. And then, of course, sometimes it's cadaver removal. How do you get 1,000 pounds of dead meat out of a trail if you end up having to euthanize it? Sometimes the owner of the property says, that's got to go. You got to get it out of here. How do we do that easily? If you're down a trail, you may not have the option to use mechanical equipment. We've found there's several versions of the rescue glides. There's a black version, a green version, and a white version, and then a sort of an off-color white version that I know of, which is pretty cool. We've gotten so good in large animal rescue that there's actually numerous manufacturers that are willing to make these kinds of pieces of equipment. But the fundamental idea is the animal is sedated or anesthetized and is slid onto this piece of equipment. It's slick, and it will allow you to move that 1,000 or 2,000 pounds of weight much easier without damage to the skin, without damage to the face, to wherever you need to get it, maybe into a horse trailer to get it to definitive treatment. This is just one example of the green rescue glide being used to transport a neurologic horse to the vet school in North Carolina State University. Tori and Justin McLeod are some of my compatriots and colleagues, and they do this kind of transport all the time, working with the vet school. They've done training with the vet school, and the vet school knows what to expect when they call and say, hey, we're bringing in a horse that's down in the trailer. It's either sedated or anesthetized. It's maintained by a veterinarian along transport, and very professionally done. I know you guys have some of these in Europe, and I would encourage you to reach out and find who those people are in your area. Very effective piece of equipment. So in conclusion, we want to try to keep it simple. Less helicopters and less mechanical winches, more people and using leverage, those kinds of things. We want to avoid the head as an attachment point. It's not intended as an attachment point. The horse would prefer that you not use it as an attachment point. So don't let people use it as an attachment point, and don't let them pull on it. We want you to use PPE and helmets. You guys know what they look like now, with the chin strap. Please buy yourself a helmet. Work with incident command. One person in charge. And, Dr. Nicola touched on a lot of that. You know, one person should be in charge. One person should be telling everybody else what to do. It may not be you as the veterinarian. In many of these cases, it's going to be the fire department captain that's the incident commander. But you're going to be working with him, and hopefully you've got a good relationship. If it's just you and your vet tech and the owner, then it's probably going to be you that's the incident commander. But what that means is that you need to ensure that everyone knows that you're in charge and you run the scene. They don't get to, they can give you ideas, but when you decide to make a plan and work the plan, they have to stick with the plan. Trying to keep people in a safe position and keeping other people out of the kill zone. As we get more complacent with animals over our careers, we tend to find ourselves in those kinds of situations, and we say, oh, this horse is too exhausted. He's not going to do that. He won't do it till the 999 of them won't, but the last one will. So keep yourself safe. You don't want to be one of those veterinarians that is 10 or 20 years from now has severe injuries, or you're trying to explain why you've got ergonomic injuries. Give the animal a lot of room. Sometimes that's tough to do in some of these large animal rescues. It's down in a trailer, it's down in a stall. It's hard to give the animal room. We may want to just manipulate it and get it to a safer area, but I really like to see you guys medically stabilize these animals first, if at all possible. As Dr. Nicola pointed out, sometimes you can't get to the animal safely. The animal's thrashing or the animal's going to hurt you. It's not worth it. But once the animal has relaxed and you're able to get to maybe ground pads out on the mud to get to it safely, If you can go ahead and get your fluids and initial treatments in there before you actually move it, I would love to see that. And then, of course, once you pull it out, if you find out that there was other problems, a broken leg or he's gutted, then you can make it look really good on your euthanasia as well. We talked about using the body skeletal elements for attachment of webbing, for slings, rescue glides, those kind of things. Stick with those kinds of, you know, there's so many of those out there these days. There's really not an excuse to try to be rigging a sling. There's too many good products that are out there these days. If you need to get a hold of me, Gracia was telling you that there's a study group that's it's called Technical Large Animal Emergency Rescue. It's a study group. It has 14,000 people on it. You can get a hold of me by my cell phone, which may be more difficult for you in Europe, but you can still do it. And email. I also respond to PMs on Facebook pretty effectively. Remember, I'm on a different time zone, but I'll try to help any way I can. And thank you very much for having me to Junior Vet.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. That was kind of awesome to see so many interesting and disastrous situations. Before I ask the participants to put some questions, I just want to say that I'm a little bit overwhelmed because Dr. Nicola's presentations and yours as well are very, I mean, they are they're super great. And I'm just thinking, how can we implement such things in Romania, thinking about financial costs and personnel, and most of all, you know, speaking of a future vet or seeing my friends who are vets and equine vets, you don't earn this kind of money to, I mean, you cannot afford to treat so many horses for free. And I'm afraid a lot of farmers who come in with horses, with sick horses, I mean, I don't see this kind of rescue here. It's
yes. So it is very difficult to make any money doing these kinds of things. What we've done here in the USA is we've got a couple of strategies. Number one, if it's a team that's responding, you normally ask for a donation. Or if it's a veterinarian that's on that team and you give them a bill. They may not pay the bill, but at least they know what it cost. And what I always tell people is, okay, so you say you can't afford it, but you got a blanket and you got all the other fancy things that you've got for your horse, but you're going to tell me you can't afford to help, let me help you with your horse. So actually what I do here is if they call me and tell me that the horse has been in the ground for 24 hours and they want me to come out now, I tell them I can teach you how to shoot it over the phone. And they don't like that, but honestly, making that really hard assessment early, you're not going to save something that's been in the mud for 24 hours. It's going to have compartment syndrome. You're not going to save it. So sometimes being honest with these people, they go like, you know, oh my God, I can't believe you said just shoot it. Well, it's been there for 24 hours. You didn't do the right thing. And eventually those kinds of attitudes get out there and they realize, hey, it's not appropriate to struggle for 24 hours. We need to call the veterinarian early, give them an opportunity to actually save the animal. And after you save a few, whether it's promoted on social media or word of mouth, eventually what happens is people start realizing that this is something that the veterinarians can help with, and it probably is worth paying for to do. So many of these situations, even here in the United States, we have the same thing. A very poor person, they love horses, they have the horse, and I just ask them, could you please make a donation? In Louisiana and some of the other states that we have here in the United States, we have veterinary foundations that have gotten together and they have said, hey, we understand that sometimes you can't get paid back for these disasters or the emergencies, but we can afford to at least pay you back for your drugs as a foundation. So you send them your receipts or what you used as far as the drugs, some of the other things that you may do, and they try to compensate you at least for that. So that may be one strategy that you could use as well. And then, of course, the next strategy is that you bill the owner for their insurance. That only works for horses that are insured, that are valuable horses. I understand that. But sometimes those insured horses that are valuable, race horses, people that have horses that are valuable enough, they may be able to cover some of the animals that are not as valued, where people don't have as much money. Does that help?
Yes, it helps. Thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah.
I don't bite.
Oh, wait a second. Sorry, now you can ask.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, is it time for questions? Because my connection
Yes.
got a bit interrupted, so I'm not.
No, yes.
I wanted
Please.
to ask, how often did you see on your site of, on your field of work, did you see, like, I don't want to say lethal injuries because that's a bit morbid, but if you've seen any broken arms or bones, has it ever been this severe? Of
Yeah.
the people
So
rescue?
with trailer wrecks, with the kinetic injuries where horses hurt themselves out in the field, and people say, oh, I need to have the veterinarian come and look, but then you realize they got kicked or they did something severe. That's where you see some of those huge lacerations, or you see the musculoskeletal injuries that they're not going to survive. Honestly, many of what we see in large animal rescue is what Dr. Nicola was talking about. The horse that's been down, he's been in a ditch or he's been in the mud for hours and hours. People just didn't notice, or they couldn't find help, or they didn't know to call. You know, sometimes they're in a new place. You know, even me, I have 2 veterinarians in my home area that I consider my veterinarians. But in the United States, it's not unusual to drive 500 miles and go riding tomorrow, you know, go see some friends. So if this happens 500 miles away, how am I going to find a local veterinarian? I'm going to be, you know, on my phone, making phone calls. So sometimes that takes hours to try to find someone. If I'm not your client, why would you go do something crazy like this, right? Sometimes people don't do those kind of things. So that can be a little bit frustrating. Most of what we see is the exhaustion. I'm going to send to Junior Vet, I'm going to send my ex-husband, Tomas Jimenez, who really got me started with this. He did an excellent paper on something called accidental hypothermia in the equine patient. And the reason that we see so many of those is the person gets the animal out of the mud and they walk it home, and then they start rubbing and scrubbing and doing all the things that you're not supposed to do with a hypothermic patient. And what does it do? It's that same thing that we see in small mammals and humans and dogs and cats. You start rubbing and scrubbing, suddenly all that nice warm blood that was in your core gets stimulated to go to the skin. It gets cooled off at the skin. Where does it go? Right back to the heart. Causes that heart to be cold. The heart doesn't like being cold. So you find it dead the next day in the stall. And we know those kind of things happen. But I will make sure I send to you so that you can distribute that out to everybody about accidental hypothermia. We know it happens in horses a lot. And it doesn't, you know, the problem is the client doesn't understand, you know, it's 27 degrees outside. Yeah, but if you've been in the mud for 3 hours and had all your, been exposed, or maybe you're an older horse, you've got these kinds of injuries, it is causing problems. And then, of course, some of the other things that happen just because of stress. And many times the client doesn't understand how dehydrated that animal is. Tomas used to say, it is dehydrated 1 minute after it goes in the mud, because the stress hormones cause that body water to move around. You guys are more experts on that than me. But as soon as that animal starts to get dehydrated, it's a positive feedback process, right? And it gets more and more dehydrated. And of course, the owner comes along and says, oh, he won't drink. Well, you guys got to do something. Maybe you've got to get a nasogastric tube. Maybe you've got to do it IV, but maybe we need add some fluids. We need to check on the dehydration status. because as Dr. Nicola pointed out, that's an injury that you're going to deal with 2 or 3 days later. It looks fine. It walks away and people say, yay, and they get their picture with the horsey, but it's not fine. It's got that long-term injury. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does actually. Thanks.
Next. I know somebody else was trying.
Yeah. If they can't scrub the horse, what should we do? Leave the horse alone, or?
Okay. Well, fortunately, as a veterinarian, you can warm those fluids before it goes in the animal's body, correct? So having a way to warm the fluids, and the best way to calm the owner down is to take that big bag of cold fluids and put it inside their shirt under their arm. First of all, you know where the owner is. Second of all, they're using their body to warm the fluids, which will cool them off. They won't be as hot-headed. There's plenty of other ways to warm your fluids, but it amazes me when I go to a human hospital and they give me fluids, what happens? I start shivering. I'm cold. Why? Because the hospital's cold. The fluids are the same temperature as what I'm putting into my body, right? So why aren't we warming those fluids, particularly if it's cold or the animal's wet or we suspect hypothermia? Other ways you can warm the horse up, you can actually put warm fluids into the rectum. I know that some horses are a little goofy about that, but it's pretty easy for you guys to do that if you have warmed fluids. You can take the animal into a situation. It could be a garage, it could be a fire station, it could be somewhere where there's already external heating to allow the horse to be warm and dry. And then of course you can do some of the external heating methods, not rubbing, but you can dampen with a towel. You can take the worst of the water off, and you could use a blow dryer, you could use a kerosene heater, one of those forced air kinds of heaters. You could put the animal in a contained area and do those kind of things. And of course, once they start to get warm, you can cover them with a blanket or something to help them maintain their heat. And then the next thing, of course, because the horse wants to eat all the time and his metabolic situation is going to improve his heat situation, give him some hay. That's the best way to let him heat himself up from inside. Again, I will send that paper to Grazia so that she can give that to all of you.
Okay, thanks. Another question. If you use a vertical lift, can you use a vehicle or a tractor or something, or is it better to use
You can.
manual?
Okay. You can. In the case studies section, we're going to talk a little bit more about vertical lifts and show you some examples. The reason they're so dangerous is because animals have opinions, and unless they are heavily sedated or anesthetized, they can exhibit their opinion. And once they're attached to something, there was a recent video that went viral on the internet of some folks down in Mexico that tried to lift a horse out of a ditch, and then the horse ran to the side of the heavy equipment and actually pulled over the forklift. It can happen. We've seen it before. I've seen videos before of that. It's dangerous under helicopters. It's dangerous under telehandlers. Anything, you take 1,000 pounds and start swinging it, and it's going to pull or jerk or possibly injure people. So it's not that it's impossible, it's just that it's difficult. And so I always encourage that people already have the equipment, know what they're going to do, have some protocols, work together with that kind of equipment ahead of time so that it goes smooth when you're on a rescue scene. You're going to see several of those. And I know in the UK, they use it quite often for removing these animals from horse trailers, simply because it's easier to lift the horse off of the chest bar or wherever he's over in the trailer, just by removing a simple roof that's made out of aluminum, or worse, that some of those are made out of a tarp, and they can just lift them out. But they have the equipment, they do it all the time, and they've worked through the protocol.
Thank you.
Sure. Good question.
I wanted to ask, as Grazia said before, the means in Romania to have all this equipment and to actually do something about these horses is quite difficult money-wise and people and everything involved. And I wanted to ask, is there something that we can replace the rescue glide with? Because I think it could be quite expensive. I don't know actually the price.
It is quite expensive. Yeah,
Yes,
by the
that's
time
why
you
I
ship
think
it from the United States or from, BARDA has a version also, by the time you ship it, it's gonna be more expensive. I guess the best thing to do would be try to find a manufacturer that has a 4 foot by 8 foot long piece of plastic. The nice thing about the rescue glides is they're actually made from plastic that's almost slick. It's like sort of like a Teflon kind of plastic. So it decreases the friction, going back to your physics class, decreases the friction as you're going over things. So that's why we love it, because it goes across concrete or asphalt or rocks or sand. Sand is awful because sand gets, if you try to pull a horse through sand, it's just awful. But it makes it more friction, not frictionless, but less friction when you're trying to pull it or move it around. It's great for removing a horse from a horse stall, because most of the time the stall door is 3.5, about a little bit over a meter, 3.5 feet, and a horse doesn't fit through there very well. So it sort of tacos up around it. So it's a special kind of plastic that's flexible, it's UV stabilized, and it has those holes in it. But I'm sure there's got to be something that's field expedient that you could find. To me, if I was a vet clinic or a vet school or you know, a 24-hour service, I would have those kinds of things. To me, the individual veterinarian needs some webbing, some reach tools, a helmet, and some kind of ID reflective kind of vest. That really, it fits in your vehicle. You can take it anywhere, or you can have it at the clinic. And when you guys start wearing helmets and you start getting your vet techs to wear helmets for when you deal with those horses that are down in stalls or neurologic cases and those kind of things, what's going to happen is a whole nother next generation of veterinarians and vet techs, as they come up, is going to realize that it's safety that's more important than their head. And when we start treating vet techs like they're not disposable, by investing in them a little bit with a $120 helmet, I think it's going to pay off in our industry.
Thank you very much for your answer. I actually saw one of those slides and they are very nice, but yeah, we don't actually have, let's say, a lot of them in Romania. I think we have only one.
It amazes me how people will buy something that, you know, I consider useless, that might use one time in your whole career, versus something like a helmet that I use every single day when I'm doing any of these kinds of things. And somebody explained to me one time, they said, you know, how often does it actually save you? It only counts once. But I've got pictures and videos of people with traumatic brain injuries from horse injuries, from getting kicked and from being crushed. And you don't want to be that person, because your career is over. You may be a research person after that, but you are not going to be out there doing what you want to do on the front line with horses.
Yes.
Sorry, that was sort of a depressing end to this whole thing.
Then I'll ask another question. If there is a case of a foal to be rescued and you have the mother that is very panicked, like, do you...
You want a good animal handler, don't you? Okay, when it comes to buddy horses, or in the case of foals and mares, I'm a big fan of having that other horse within the sight line of the foal or the other horse, so that they can see it. It tends to keep them calmer. My horses are very buddy sour, so they would panic if I took their buddies away. But I need good animal handlers. I need somebody that's going to be able to keep that horse in the sight line without getting a person hurt by getting too close or letting the horse go or doing something like that, because they can get pretty crazy. You are exactly right. Now, if the other horse, for whatever reason, is not calming down the animal that's in the situation, then I would lead it away. Or I would heavily sedate the other horse so that it cannot do anything stupid and get somebody hurt. We've seen that numerous of the situations on the side of the road. You bring the animal out of the situation, sometimes they can walk out, or you find them out, they're running loose on the side of the road. and you're trying to collect them up for transport. We had, I had a wreck about an hour away from me that I attended that had 14 polo horses in one trailer, and they got them all out. And the veterinarian was very smart. When I got there, there was 14 horses with their heads touching the ground, standing there next to the interstate with big truck traffic going by. And they did not care because they were totally sedated. They were like, we're good. Did I answer your question?
Yes, yes, you did. What if, I know we don't have them in Romania, but what if there are a wild mare with a foal?
Oh, that's tough. That is really tough. So the guy that I pointed out, Willis Lamb, Lamm, he runs a website called Wild Horse Mentors. It's excellent. He does 300 or 400 rescues of wild and feral horses every single year. His website, he's also on that Facebook page that I manage, but he is very good about protocols, sharing information, behavior, how they handle these kinds of things, using ropes or fencing further away. It's really hard with a wild horse versus a feral horse. The feral horses are sort of used to people, which can also be more problematic sometimes, versus the wild horse. But I would encourage you to take a look at that Wild Horse Mentors site, and he's the one to really ask those kinds of questions. I am not a wild horse expert.
I will. Thank you very much.
Sure. It's not what you know, it's who you know. Grazie. Are we ready to go to the next one?
Hello.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, which was the most time-consuming rescue you were present at, and how long did it last?
Most time-consuming. Well, in the very beginning, when we first started, it took us a lot longer because we didn't know what kind of equipment to use. That was back in the 90s. We didn't have all the nice equipment that we've got these days. We were sort of making it on the scene as we went along. And at that point, we weren't really sure that how we should do some of these things. We'd been told things by other people, but they didn't really know either, and we were sort of winging it. So probably the longest one would be, went to a septic tank rescue. And because it was a septic tank, human septic tank, we had some protocols that had to be in place before we could move the horse. Unfortunately, we were thinking, hey, you know, this horse has been down in this stuff. It's, as Dr. Nicola pointed out, they can sometimes aspirate things into their lungs. You certainly don't want aspirations of human poop into their lungs. The horse was obviously getting it around its mouth, and we were concerned about ingestion as well. And of course, it's standing in water, wet environment. So that one probably took 3 hours simply because back then we thought we had to lift it. These days we would do a sideways drag just like you would out of a pool. But back then we thought we had to vertically lift it. So it took maybe 3 hours to be able to get all the resources, the protocol, figure out the plan, and then enact the plan. To me, if it takes you, you know, it's in human rescue, we have that idea of 1 hour being the golden hour. If you're injured, we'd like to have you extricated into definitive treatment within an hour. That's why we move helicopters in the military to go pick you up if you get injured or shot. And we get you back to a first-line hospital, treat you there. If it's really severe, then we put you on a plane and get you somewhere else. And that chain of custody can happen pretty quick. That happens for people with our ambulance system, EMS. They try to stick with that golden hour. With horses, to me, it's hard to get that golden hour simply because you've got a whole bunch of people that show up at the rescue that maybe haven't worked together. They've got transport times. You've got to get there as a veterinarian. You've got to drive there. That takes time. When you get there, you got to figure out what's going on. That's why I like, as Dr. Nicola pointed out, send me a picture of what's going on. That way, the whole time I'm driving, I'm thinking, could I do this? Could I do that? Your brain is an amazing thing. It will generate other options as you're driving. And then when you get there and you see it for sure, then you go, hey, I've already thought through these options. let's use this one. I think this would be the best idea. And don't be afraid to say, hey, that was a great idea, but it didn't work for whatever reason. Let's switch to the next idea. Have a backup plan. Sometimes I've gotten to plan G or F. But you got to remember, you got to worry about that medical status of that patient if it takes you that long to do that.
Thank you.
Sure.
I think we can take the 15 minutes break.
Okay.
And come back for the next one then.
Fantastic. I'm going to switch to the other slide.
Okay. So don't go anywhere.